The South African Human Rights Commission has announced that it will proceed with litigation against 5 provinces which still use pit latrines in schools. The Commission says that litigation aims to enforce the minimum uniform norms as well as standards for public school infrastructure. The 5 provinces are Mpumalanga, the Northwest, Free State, KwaZulu Natal and the Eastern Cape Province. To unpack the impact and the importance of this move is education law specialist and CEO of the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools, that's Dr. Jaco Deacon, and Tekano Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity CEO, Lebogang Ramafoko. A pleasure to have you both on the program this evening. Mr. Deacon, I'll start with you. The South African Human Rights Commission is planning to start this litigation against these 5 provincial education departments over a lack of sanitation in schools. This surely is a welcome development. What is your view on this?
Indeed, no, we welcome it. The bottom line is the Human Rights Commission should have stepped in a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's a shame that that we've reached this point. I mean, just a few months ago, during COVID, when learners were supposed to return to schools, we discovered that more than 3,500 schools are still without running water. So whilst we were supposed to fight COVID, we were still battling to get water at schools. And what's even more shocking is that those provincial departments don't spend all the money allocated for infrastructure. So at the end of every financial year, they must return money allocated for infrastructure, but yet they plan to eradicate pit toilets over a 2 or a 3-year period, and they don't execute. It took a company or rights organizations like Section 27 to take the department to court in Limpopo, not only about textbooks, but also about the pit toilets. A rights organization, Equal Education, had to take the minister to court in the Eastern Cape, where they still had mud schools. There are still mud schools in that province. And subsequently, the minister published norms and standards for infrastructure, but that's only for new schools. So we're not really addressing the current issues in our schools. And I think the bottom line is, though there's a constitutional right to education in terms of Section 29, we're infringing on the basic human rights of the learners. So we welcome the step by the Human Rights Commission. It's too little, too late, but still, it's a welcome step.
Mayor Ramafoko, you've heard Dr. Deacon there saying that while the move is welcome, it seems it's too little, too late.
Thank you. I must say you are very faint where you are, but I do agree with my colleague that while it is too little, too late, it is really welcome. I think, we need to ask ourselves really whether or not, as the ANC, as a ruling party has professed, whether we are really a developmental state that understands the historical imbalances in this country and that is willing to do something about them. And clearly, when a Human Rights Commission, a Chapter 9 institution, has to go to the court to make sure that a government that basically purports to be a developmental state really fails children who are the most poor, we need to ask ourselves what kind of a country we are in.
I'm going to stay with you a bit. The South African Human Rights Commission intends to take the education departments in Mpumalanga, the Northwest, the Free State, the KZN, as well as the Eastern Cape to court as part of its mission to eradicate these pit toilets at more than 3,000 schools. What can you tell us about the state of sanitation in our schools, specifically in rural areas?
So I don't think that we have ever taken into cognizance what the benefit of sanitation for children is. What kind of an environment do we expect children to learn in when sanitation is such a problem? We also know that the state of sanitation in our schools leads to a number of illnesses that learners get, but also that these toilets are a site of bullying, particularly for young women, because in other areas, that is where boys would gather and really bully young women. So I do think that what we are seeing is a school or a schooling system that does not look at education holistically, that does not look at learning, not only as to what happens in the classroom, but also the state in which that learning or the context in which that learning takes place. And I think the fact that we are sitting in a country where a Department of Basic Education has to be taken to court really tells you how little they think of rural schools and rural learning. So not only must learners walk long distances, must be in schools that are poorly resourced, but they must be in places where they cannot even exercise their basic human need of being able to go to a working and clean toilet when they need to do so. So it's almost as if we are setting those that are already facing challenges with their learning and in education. We are setting further challenges for them to face just for basic learning to take place.
Dr. Deacon, let's bring you back. Now, the proposed litigation follows a number of engagements with the departments, which started after the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. What can we read into the timing of these developments? You did express a bit earlier on that this has been long overdue.
Well, it's Christmas time, so the beginning of the new school year is just around the corner. So we need to do everything to get all the learners back into the schools. The bottom line is, under the COVID regulations, all learners haven't returned to schools full-time yet. So we're still on a rotation basis in some of the primary schools, and most of the high schools are still in a rotation system. So the timing is actually great to say, before the academic year starts, spend your money. Remember, they get the new budget. The new funds will be available from the 1st of April next year. So the Human Rights Commission should ensure that before they send money back to Treasury, they actually use the money in the provinces. But I would like to latch on what your previous speaker said. I don't only think that we need to take the provincial departments to court. There are a number of other parties and people involved in the education system who are really sleeping on duty. I mean, we do have oversight committees in all provinces, in your provincial legislatures. We do have the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, and they visit the provinces. So what exactly are they doing? So I'm really concerned that we're still having this discussion whilst we have all these oversight committees in place, and they're simply not doing what they're supposed to do.
Is it not interesting that oftentimes we see these problems occurring in mostly rural schools?
Unfortunately, we see that in the rural schools, and I think part of the problem is that the departmental officials don't visit those schools. They I don't want to say over-service the schools in the city areas or in towns, but they neglect the township, the rural areas, and that's a fact. I mean, all the provincial departments are guilty of that. But the bottom line is, in all those schools, you've got senior government officials, departmental officials, and they are called school principals, and they should be taken to task as well. I mean, they should report. They should be on the telephones, the parents, the governing body. Everybody should do more. The message we're sending to our children is, you're not important. That's exactly the message we're sending. So when the Human Rights Commission approached the court, they're going to take the head of the department to task because it's their first responsibility. But there are more parties involved, and I truly hope that the Human Rights Commission will take them to task as well.
Now, Dr. Deacon, in the same breath, I mean, you look at the response from various government departments, and it seems there's no real seriousness to really address some of these problems. And, you know, even the deaths of children who die in pit latrines still doesn't seem to have struck a nerve here.
Yeah, I would like to see personal liability. I would like to see that we sue in the name of the HOD, the responsible official. Even if there's a court action against or a court ruling against the government official, the taxpayers will, at the end of the day, foot the bill. So unless these perpetrators and people in very senior positions start to feel the responsibility in their pockets, we're not going to see an improvement. Our problem is not legislation. Our problem is not money. Our problem is the lack of competency in leadership and the lack of a will to really make a difference. And that you're not going to rectify through either legislation or even a court case. We need to fire those people. We need to set an example that if you don't serve as you're supposed to serve, you're not welcome in this department, and we don't see that.
Ramafoko, you've heard from the good doctor there, and it seems that the litigation will aim to enforce the norms and standards of governing public facilities, following these several cases in which children have actually died in pit toilets. Are you in any sense confident that this process will achieve what it aims to?
Well, unfortunately, I think institutions like the Human Rights Commission must act within the law. And I do agree that, in fact, the step that they have taken is the right step. I also think that while I agree that there are school governing bodies and there are school principals, the idea that people, even school governing bodies, have spoken about this and they have really tried to speak up and they have not been listened to, is something that we must consider. So I think it's a very difficult one to say, you know, will this help? Because we do know that it could take a very long time. We have seen how it has taken from the time that Section 27 and equal education have really taken the government to court and how the government can drag their feet. My point is we need to find other ways in which we support the actions of these NGOs, but also the Human Rights Commission. We need to ask ourselves, what can we do in the different rural communities to help communities to really, in other ways, be up in arms around the state of learning in the in the schools? How far can we escalate this matter? Unfortunately, it will take long because we do have a government that basically will duck and dive when they are supposed to take responsibility. But like we have seen with local government elections, 2024 is not very far away. And I think one of the actions that for me is very important to take is with some of these problems. Now that I think in a few months, actually, not even in years, people will be campaigning for 2024, we need to be putting all of these pertinent issues as election questions that different communities need to be asking those that are coming to them and asking them for votes, how they are going to deal with some of these problems. Unfortunately, it will be one day too long for learners who've got to live and study under these conditions. But I think the more we speak up about it and we do not tire, we will understand that there will not be quick fixes, but silence is also not going to create quick fixes. So yes, it will take too long, far too long for rural schools and rural learners, but it is a step in the right direction. The question is, how do we support it when we have other opportunities to speak out and support rural communities to speak out around these questions?
I wanted to take a quick breather and return to speak more about this conversation that we are having around unsafe sanitation in our school facilities. Joining me there, of course, is Ramafoko from the Soul City Institute, as well as Dr. Jaco Deacon. He's the CEO at FETSAS. Do stay with us as we will continue with that discussion shortly. Thank you for staying with us. We continue our chat now regarding unsafe sanitation conditions at the country schools. Of course, the South African Human Rights Commission has announced that it will proceed with litigation against 5 provinces which still have pit latrines in their schools. Joining us for that conversation is Dr. Jaco Deacon, as well as Tekano Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity CEO, that's Lebogang Ramafoko. Ramafoko, I want to continue with you. I mean, your last point really touched on what NGOs are left to do for government departments, where it seems that they are sleeping on the job, while it's left to the NGOs to take the plight of unsafe sanitary conditions in school to heart. This is disappointing in my view.
It's very disappointing, but what I wanted to play at was that litigation is one area in which you can actually advocate for change to happen. But we also need to be going into these communities and into these schools to understand what the challenges are and see whether we can bring other NGOs to come on board and almost have ways in which we can work with these communities to say what is possible to solve the crisis. And the reason why I'm saying that is that, you know, let's say this case takes 2 years or even a year. Before implementation, what should the learners do? So I'm saying, coupled with advocacy, coupled with litigation, let us find ways in which there is probably innovations out there in which we can make sanitation accessible, safe, and decent and dignified for learners at this point in time.
Dr. Deacon, the Commission wrote to all education MECs to ask for details on sanitation at all schools. This started a lengthy process of correspondence in which the Commission established that thousands of schools in 5 provinces still use these pit latrines. But do you believe we know the full extent of this problem?
I do believe we know the full extent. We had a very interesting report by Equal Education. I mean, they did their own investigation, grassroots research. So I think there's a comprehensive list. So I don't think the biggest hurdle is the fact that we don't know where those schools are situated. The 3,500 schools without running water, those would be your first schools that you need to start to look at. And we could deliver water within 6 weeks. So when crunch came, the departments and you could actually perform very well. But I would like to add to what Lebo has said. I think on a grassroots level, that's where we can make a difference. So you're looking at private-state partnerships.
Right.
But then we need to remove the red tape. Then it should be easy for a local contractor to engage with the SGB to say, that's the cost. And the government provide the funds directly to the school. They engage with the contractor. That it's monitored on that specific level, that the parents will be the eyes and the ears to make sure that we execute. If it's a 2-week time frame, if it's a month time frame, make sure that you execute within that time period. What we've seen in the Western Cape a few years ago was a rand for rand partnership between the department and the school. That was more to invest into technology in schools. But that's also something that school communities can do. For every rand they contribute, the department will also contribute 1 rand, or maybe 2 rands for every 1 rand that the school will invest, or the community will invest. I think in that sense, we can use all the contractors, the local contractors who can return, service those toilets. It doesn't help if you send in somebody from another province with a better tender for the department, and they service in the rural areas. You need the local people to take ownership, the local contractors who can provide an after service as well.
Ramafoko, there's also been another development. I mean, when one thinks about sanitation in schools or poor sanitation in schools, the name that comes up is the incident of the death of Michael Komape, that young man who died in a pit latrine. Now, according to the Commission's Andre Gam, there is already an interdict against this department obtained by Section 27 after Komape's death, which may cover the same scope. This surely is a welcome development to see some movement pertaining to that case.
Yes, it is. But again, it must be said that is this a developmental state where we've got to have NGOs going and using the instruments of the law? And thank God we've got these instruments of the law to actually make, I mean, it will not bring the young person back. The family will not get their child back. But should we really be going to an extent where there are interdicts, where clearly by its neglect, a child and a life was lost? And I keep on saying this, and I keep on saying it even when we speak about gender-based violence, that what we need to understand as society is that our answer is not in these political parties. Because clearly what happens if people speak one thing, but they practice another thing. It is welcome. But how many poor black children must die? And how many NGOs must work tirelessly to basically take these government departments to court? And that is why I'm saying we need to go back as civil society. We need to go back as citizens to the drawing board around 2024 and say what it is that we need from people who say they want to govern, what it is that we need, because clearly we are not getting what we want. What is left, and that is a democracy we must guard against, are these instruments of the law that we see organizations like Section 27 and the Human Rights Commission using to basically forcing the government to account. But a developmental state is a state that is not forced to account.
Dr. Deacon, I'll give you the parting shot and pose the question there, that the clarion call or question that's been posed by Lebo as to what is required. Is it the death of another child that's really going to make us take this matter seriously?
Well, let's start with the death of the child. That could have been avoided. So that's straightforward criminal negligence. So hopefully the law will run its course and take those people to book. But we've lost a life. We're going to lose more lives if we don't act now. It's not something that's unforeseen. It's something that we know. We've got 3,500 schools without proper sanitation, without proper water. We have money. So there are absolutely no excuses for government not to address it immediately. And I do think the minister and the president need to speak up. They need to show leadership.
Yeah.
The MECs parade every January with the matric results and tell how proud they are, but still the houses aren't in order. So I think we need to really be tough on the leadership within the provinces, the political leadership, as well as your senior departmental officials, but also your school principals. If they really care about the learners, then they will be on the telephone. Then they'll be in the faces of the officials, and then they'll make plans in the communities. But part of the problem is that we still think it is state schools. It is public schools. So the public, the immediate community within that school should take responsibility. That will include your local NGOs. That will include your religious community, your agricultural organizations, your parents. And when they start to work together and see this is our problem, it's not a government problem. They are one of the partners. They're supposed to provide money, but we're not victims. We can improve our schools. We should improve our schools. It's, at the end of the day, our children. And if we can put a focus on the public side of the school, where a community takes responsibility, then we're going to move forward. Then we're back to the principle of it takes a village to raise a child. In this instance, it will take a whole village.
But it seems that even the communities themselves feel let down somewhat.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, it's yes. But we need to unlock the potential to say, don't sit and wait. Approach your local councillor. Approach the local business. Start to work as partners. Approach the NGOs in your immediate vicinity. Don't only wait for government. They're one of the partners in a public school.
And Lebo, I see you also wanted to give your input there regarding just the general consensus or feeling of some of these communities.
I mean, there are so many people that have letters and letters where they have written to councillors, they have engaged, with the local government. When you've got a governance where there is no accountability, I know the CSVR did a study that was called The Smoke That Calls, that says, in fact, the only time that they see officials is when people take the law into their hands and they burn something. And that is why I was saying, perhaps one of the strategies we need to do is to have NGOs work at community level and saying, where are the bottlenecks? But we need accountability. We need accountability because many times SGBs are also paralyzed by the politics that are happening in communities where there is a lot of talk and no actions, where the very councillors are also interested on who's going to get the tender to do the toilets and who's going to get a cut in this. We need accountability, but we probably need a number of strategies that will support the litigation, which is very welcome. But while it is taking place, we need to make sure that we sit with communities, we understand where the blockages are, and we make sure that we support communities to take action.
Ramafoko there. That was FETSA's CEO, Dr. Jaco Deacon, at the Tekano Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity. And that's the CEO, Lebogang Ramafoko, speaking to us there about unsafe sanitation in the country's schools.